Okay, so now that we have read the documentation, now that we feel familiar with the technical jargon, we're ready to actually access the API. And I think that the hard part of dealing with APIs is really wading through the documentation and jargon, because we have this amazing tool, requests, which makes it pretty straightforward to actually access an API once we know where we're trying to go and what parameters we need and all of that. Requests is a main tool in Python for working with APIs, and so it is a really, really popular, widely used library. So, if we're going to issue a GET request to pull data from the API, we're going to use the request.get function. So here are the steps to do this. First, we have to identify the root and endpoint of the API we're trying to access. The root and endpoint together are going to create an address that we're going to pass to the first argument of request.get. So, for example, for the census, the root is listed here. Whoops. There it is. I accidentally clicked on it, but there it is. And then the endpoint is on the next line. Now, if I want to put those two things together in Python to append two strings together, you could just do root plus endpoint, and then that will give me the entire address. So I've created root, endpoint, and now I have a Python variable address that's going to be the entire web address, root and endpoint, that points to the data I need. Step 2 is to identify the parameters you're going to need and the values they should be set to. And this will include your access key. Okay? So that means going into the documentation and looking at the list of parameters for a particular endpoint, reading the descriptions of each parameter, and choosing what they need to be set to. Step 3, you're going to place those parameters and their values into a Python dictionary. Now remember, a Python dictionary looks a lot like a JSON file. So, for example, for the census, this is what it can look like. So, I'm going to pass 3 parameters to this particular endpoint. So get, I'm saying it's GeoID and pop. I learned from the documentation that get specifies which features I'm trying to get out of the API. So I want the geographical ID number of every single state, and I want the population of every single state. 4 defines which records I want. So I'm saying state, wildcard. That star is a wildcard. So I'm saying give me all the states, and Puerto Rico and DC while you're at it. Give me everything you've got. And then key, census key. Now notice census key is not in quotes. That's because I used the method described in the last video for putting my census key in an environmental variable and then bringing it into Python as a variable named census key. And this way I never have to display on the screen what my census key actually is. And then you're going to put all of these into a JSON looking format, a Python dictionary, with the curly braces exactly like this, okay? And so all of this is a variable called my dictionary, okay? So, next we're going to pass both the endpoint address and the parameters to request.get. The first argument is the address, and the second one is params for parameters equals my dictionary. Simple enough. The next step is to check to see whether this worked. So in step 4, I created a variable r. In step 5, I'm just going to call r, and it's going to return to me an HTTP code. Now, if that HTTP code is 200, I'm great, because it means that as far as the API is concerned, the request was successful. If the response is something other than 200, then I need to check my endpoint. I need to check my parameters because something wasn't right. If it's HTTP 404, it means that my address was wrong. If it's HTTP 401 or 403, it means that it wasn't, it was forbidden, which means that my access key was wrong. Okay? So it's easy enough to just look up a particular HTTP code if you get something else, right? It's all listed, say, on Wikipedia, and it'll tell you exactly what that number means. Step 6. If if you got a status code of 200, the next step is to extract the data. And so you can extract the data in a raw text format by using the text attribute, so r.text. It's usually going to be in JSON format, sometimes XML, but mostly JSON. And so if it's JSON, then you could use the JSON.loads function that we talked about last time to register that raw text data into as a JSON object in Python. So here I'm taking that data, that JSON data on state populations, and I'm loading it as a Python JSON object. And then finally, return to module 3 when we talked all about JSONs. Use all of those methods to convert the data into a data frame, because we're going to need to be working with data frames to do our subsequent analyses. So that's requests in a nutshell. One last thing in this module, and that is sometimes it's not necessary to use requests. Many APIs now have their own specialized libraries for Python that wrap around the request library so that you don't have to work with requests directly. The whole goal of these libraries is to make it easier and more user-friendly to use an API. So there's a Google Maps library, there's a Twitter library. You'll see on your lab that there's a specialized library for using Genius to download song lyrics. Okay? Now, it doesn't always make it easier and more user-friendly, but in an ideal world, it would. You could go to this URL, which has a list of all of the current Python libraries that are wrappers around requests in order to access a particular API.